while he's getting that pulled up, so I'm actually going to kind of be talking about two different career pathways today because I am currently in the process of changing careers, and something that I'm excited to talk about today is how skills can transfer between different careers. And so that's something we'll talk about when we kind of get to that part of the presentation. But a little bit about me. So this is young Sarah. So growing up, I really loved reading. I really loved playing outside and using my imagination. I really loved telling stories. I really loved writing stories. I really loved consuming stories as media and as books. And so naturally, of course, I became a teacher. That's supposed to be a joke because teaching,
I get it.
Thank you. Teaching was never really on my radar growing up. Actually, when I was in 5th grade, I decided that I wanted to be a writer. That was the only thing that I ever wanted to be when I was growing up. You know, in elementary school, they usually do like a career day and they're like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, I want to be a writer. But I was a very practical 5th grader, and so in my mind at that time, you had 2 career paths if you wanted to be a writer. You could be a novelist, which for me wasn't really an option because novelists don't make any money, and I was very practical, and I needed to have a job that gave me a salary so I could support my family, so novels weren't going to be a thing for me. Or I could go into journalism, and journalism is boring because it's political and fact-finding. So as a 5th grader who discovered my love for writing, I simultaneously talked myself out of ever actually pursuing writing seriously. And so what ended up happening was I got to college and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought that I had some ideas of some career paths I wanted to pursue, and I got in and started talking to advisors and started looking at the curriculum I would have to follow, and very quickly realized I don't want to do any of these things. So I was kind of panicking because here I was, freshman at my university that I worked really hard to get into, and I didn't really have a plan. But thankfully, my RA, my first year, was absolutely fantastic, and she was actually a part of a program that was called Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages. She told me some more about her program, and it really focuses on giving you the skills necessary to teach English, but in a way that is different than what you guys might experience in your English classes. The focus was really, how do we teach English as a language to students, to adults who are coming to the United States from another country. And then the other option too with that is you can actually travel to other countries and teach English as a foreign language there. And so I was very interested in this as a concept. I saw a lot of tie-ins with my passions with writing and language, and how language can be used as this tool to transform people's lives. So I said, yes, that's good enough, I'll take that. So I dove into that program, got really passionate about it, and ended up getting my minor in linguistics. And the thing that was cool about the university that I was at the time, it's Lee University, it's up in Cleveland. They had one of the few programs in the country that allowed me to simultaneously get my degree in TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, and to get my teaching license at the same time. That's something that not a lot of schools in the country at the time were doing. If you are interested in education at all, what that usually looks like is you will take a lot of education classes, and then you will focus on a specific grade band, grade level. If you want to teach things like theater or English or art or whatever your specific content area is, then you'll take classes on those things and then take the praxis test in order to be able to take them. A lot of people who teach ESL will do all of that, they'll get their degree to teach, and then they will tack what's called an ESL endorsement onto their teaching license. So it's not something that they actually studied when they were in school. They haven't necessarily had classes in it, but my degree program was different. It was all focused on how to teach English as a language. So I took classes like teaching grammars to speakers of other languages, the history of English as a second language, I worked in an English language center where we had adults from the community come in and we would teach English to them every Thursday night. And also classes like language acquisition, which were really cool because you learned like how the brain worked and how the brain processed language and literally like how you learn another language. And I was simultaneously learning Spanish as a part of my undergraduate career. And so that worked really well for me because I was like, I understand how the brain processes language, so I can learn this language better. So that was a win-win for me. But then in addition to taking those very specific classes, I also was taking my education classes as well, such as educational theory. I did student teaching, but I specifically taught in a ESL classroom. I did one placement at the elementary level and then one placement at the high school level because my licensure is from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. And then in order to finalize my teaching license, I did specifically take the English as a second language praxis, in addition to the principles of learning and teaching practices that all teachers have to take no matter what content area you decide that you want to teach. So this program was super unique because it allowed me to do all of these things at one time within my degree field. So as soon as I graduated, I had my ESL training, I had my education training, I had my teaching license, and so from there, I went straight into the classroom. As soon as I graduated, I was able to get a job here in Rutherford County schools. I worked at the elementary level, partially because I'm very aware of the fact that I look like a high schooler myself, and so I didn't know how that would work if I was trying to like teach in a high school. I dealt with that as a student teacher where the teachers would be like, yo, where's your hall pass? And I'm like, I work here. So I decided elementary would probably be the better choice for me. I also just have a pretty fun-loving personality, and you can do a lot of cool stuff with younger students, and you get to provide a lot of very cool experiences with them. So I did that for 4 years, actually. I taught at the same school all 4 years. I taught kindergarten through 5th grade, and had a lot of responsibilities. So because I was an ESL teacher, I had a lot of ESL responsibilities, such as I had to screen all of our incoming students to find out if they qualified for ESL services. I had to keep up with documentation for every single student for the whole year and for each semester and for each quarter. We had to determine what accommodations they would need in their classroom level. We had to make sure that their CUME files were correct if they were transferred from another school, and then had to maintain those CUME files in case they transferred to schools anywhere elsewhere. Had to maintain parent communication because a lot of the classroom teachers were hesitant to contact parents because most of them spoke another language. Also had to support classroom teachers to make sure that they were meeting the accommodations that our students needed. Had to advocate for those students if they needed extra services for some other reason. We had to give them an additional test each year that screened their language proficiency. That also involved coming up with our own schedule to administer that test that did not interfere with learning as much as we could. We also had to make sure we were providing testing accommodations. And in addition to all of that, that doesn't even include actually planning your own curriculum and then teaching. So there was a lot that we had to do as ESL teachers that I was not initially prepared for. And I was super, super fortunate to have an amazing team that was able to walk me through all of these things so I was able to know how to best provide services for my students. But then that's not all. There are also responsibilities I just had because I was a teacher in the school, which included being on the school leadership team, being on the first responder team if there was ever a medical crisis or a safety crisis. We have to conduct parent-teacher conferences and attend school events and also plan those events. We had early morning duty, afternoon duty, test administration for the regular TCAP or state testing, and then I specifically was appointed our house system. I don't know if y'all might have experienced that, but a lot of elementary schools are now switching to doing like house systems like they do in Harry Potter, and you earn points for your house. It's super cool. I actually really liked it, but I was responsible for almost all of that at my school. I also got to plan a competition called the Amazing Shake and run our ambassador program, and on top of all of that, I was the school mascot. That was one of my favorite things, actually.
What was it?
Was super fun. We were the Huskies,
Oh.
and the costume was like way too big, and they had this huge tail that would drag on the floor and get dirty constantly. So I show you all this for two reasons. One, love your teachers because they're doing a lot behind the scenes that not necessarily everybody knows about. And two, I had a lot of responsibilities as an ESL teacher. And I would argue that I probably had more than what other classroom teachers necessarily had because I had all of these extra responsibilities as specifically an ESL teacher in addition to what I was doing with the school, which meant me and my team had to be super collaborative. We had to work well together, and I had to be incredibly organized and detail oriented because a lot of the things that are covered from the ESL responsibility actually come from federal laws that are in place. And so if we messed something up, if we weren't serving a student who needed services, if we weren't maintaining their CUME files, if their documentation got messed up, and we got audited, somebody from the federal government came to check to make sure we were doing everything we were supposed to be doing and we weren't, that's a lot of trouble. So there was a lot of pressure to make sure that we were maintaining all of these things for our students, A, to make sure that they were having the best learning experience possible, and B, to make sure that we were in compliance with these laws that are in place to protect those students. So lots of organization, lots of having to make sure that all of those details were added up and accounted for. And then a little something happened. I don't know if you guys were affected by this at all, but there was this little thing called a global pandemic, and it messed everything up, and we all shut down for 6 months? So I was in Rutherford County Schools when we closed down, so that was in March of 2020. When we all left and then had to go through the chaos of how do we teach school during the global pandemic. And there was a lot that went on internally with me at that time as well while everything was happening, specifically of is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? I will call it a quarter life crisis because I was 25 when this happened, but it became this question of me when things were getting so chaotic and you're seeing loved ones who are passing away and you're realizing how short and precious life is in these kind of situations. It makes you think, am I really in the place that I want to be? Because the fact of the matter is this is our one life, we get one shot, and so you don't want to be in a career forever that isn't something that you're super passionate about. And while I really liked teaching, while I was good at teaching, I always felt like there was something that was missing. And especially towards the end of my career, I felt like I was very limited in what I was able to do, both creatively when it came to organizing events for my students, but also for the supports that I needed to provide them. So I started mulling this question over when we were in lockdown of what do I want to do? And I came back to this idea again of well, the only thing I've ever been really, really passionate about is writing. But I still had this idea in my mind. I can either be a novelist or I can be a journalist. And those two things were still not super desirable for me as careers. And then lo and behold, while we were in lockdown, this docu-series came out. It was on Disney Plus and it's called The Imagineering Story. And this docu-series changed my life, which sounds kind of dramatic, but it did, because one of the features of this docu-series is it talks about how Disney World, Disneyland were built and developed. And one of the things that they really focused on is all of the different roles that were necessary to build a theme park. And a lot of these things were things that are obvious. You're going to need ride engineers to build the rides. You're going to need artists to make concept art. That kind of stuff is obvious. But what wasn't obvious to me was one of the roles in making theme parks was writers. They needed writers to come up with stories for the rides, story for concepts, for lands. And suddenly I'm realizing that something that I really love to do, writing, can be incorporated into something else that I grew up loving. I loved immersive experiences as a kid. I loved going to theme parks with my family. I loved going to museum exhibits with my family. Anytime that there was something that you could throw yourself into and just be kind of transported to this other world, this other career, it was my happy place. It was where I felt the most like myself and that I could be myself the most in those moments. And then I realized, in addition to this, that one of my favorite things that I was doing as a teacher was creating these experiences for my students. So it was really kind of like a puzzle coming together for me. I know that's kind of a cliche analogy, but it really was like all of these pieces started falling into place for me. I realized that you could write for themed entertainment. I realized that themed entertainment was something that I was passionate about. And then I realized that even more than that, I was passionate about providing experiences to other people where they could go and they could experience something where it could either, take them out of the real world, or they could interact with characters that they loved, or you could become someone else for a day, because those kinds of things can really be transformative, but they can also provide people creative outlets. So I started doing some research, and I learned about the different ways that you can write for themed entertainment. And there are a lot. There are so many different ways that you can write for themed entertainment, and most of them I didn't even realize. So one of the things that I really love is narrative design. Narrative design is typically seen in video games, and so that is when you are looking at how you're planning a video game, how the character will interact with the other characters in the story, and how the events will unfold to get you from the beginning to the end of the game. There is somebody who sits down, plans all that out, and writes all of that down, and that is a narrative designer. Obviously, there are also scripts that are needed if you are making an immersive theater production where you can go in. There's one right now that's really popular in New York called Sleep No More. That's a theater production, but it's in a building. It's a 7-floor building, and you as a guest have to walk through the building to find the actors, and you walk in on them delivering a monologue or doing a dance or something like that. But it's up to you completely as the guest to find them, and you're not sitting there watching it on a stage. You're literally moving throughout a building and then encountering different actors there. So that's a concept for immersive theater. But with that said, there are the people who need to write the scripts for that. People also need to write scripts for dialogue on rides. If you guys have been on a ride before and heard characters talking or heard people talking, there is somebody who writes the script for what those people are going to say. For video games, there are people who come up with the scripts for what the character is going to say. There are also documents called treatments, where it lays out exactly what happens in a ride. The Haunted Mansion at Disney is one of my favorite examples of a treatment, because the writing that goes, this is not the Haunted Mansion, by the way, this is an example of something one of my friends did. But the writing that goes into these kind of rides of what are the people going to say at the beginning, what are the guests going to encounter, what are they going to see, what are the lights going to do, what are they going to hear, that's all compiled in a master document called a treatment. You can also write things that are guest facing, and so these will be like signs that you see around parks, around escape games, anything where you go and you as the guest see something that is was written by a writer somewhere. So that's another role that you can have when writing for entertainment. And then of course there are also internal documents that are just going to be seen by the company that you're working for, that include like summaries of the experience. There's also going to be things like meeting notes and story proposals that are maybe not necessarily the most exciting things, but they're also going to be things that have to be accounted for, and so there has to be somebody who's in charge of those things. So earlier I mentioned transferable skills, and so this has been something that I have been having to learn a lot recently, because my undergraduate degree wasn't in writing. I am having to currently, right now, as a student at NTSU, teach myself a lot of things about themed entertainment while simultaneously honing my craft as writing. But there are still a lot of skills that I have from my time as a teacher that easily transfer over into this different discipline. So one of the things about curriculum design is you have to be big picture focused and you have to be detail focused. Big picture is y'all are going to take a test at some point, and so your teacher needs to know what's on that test so that they can look and make sure that they are planning all the little units and all the little lessons that lead up to that big thing. You don't magically just learn how to multiply fractions one day. There's a step-by-step process that goes into learning how to get there. And so as a teacher, something that I was doing was, well, I would say, I want my students to be able to write a 5-sentence paragraph with an introduction sentence, a conclusion sentence, and 3 sentences of body text information. Well, we wouldn't jump right straight to that. We would start very slowly. We would talk about introductions, we would talk about facts, we would talk about research, we would talk about conclusion sentences, and then put all of that together. And so that's something that transfers to when you're looking at writing for entertainment too. Yes, you might have a big ride or an escape room or a museum exhibit that you have in mind, but there are lots of teeny tiny pieces that have to all be put together in order to get up to that point. A lot of teaching is creative problem solving. You're constantly running into things that you didn't expect to happen, and you have to figure out very quickly how to make sure that those problems get solved. And then, like I mentioned earlier, one of the things that I really loved doing specifically was designing experiences for my students. So we would do things like parties for them. I mentioned we did a school-wide competition. We had a program where our students did ambassadors. It was basically like a leadership training program. And so all of those things are things that the students experienced. And when you're designing something that people are going to interact with and they're going to be a part of, you have to think again about all of the little things that are going to go into making that experience. So this concept of experience design from events for a school can easily transfer into events or experiences that will happen on a larger scale. And then the other thing to think about is when we are teaching specifically at the ESL level, or as an ESL teacher at the elementary level, I was constantly having to rewrite lessons for my students because they needed to understand things like poetry or symbiotic relationships or how chloroplast helps leaves to grow. First graders who don't speak English don't know what chloroplast is. And so one of my main jobs and responsibilities was to figure out a way to make that information accessible to those students. And that comes down to looking at how those students would interact with the material that I was presenting to them. Looking at themed entertainment, everything you create, you have to consider, how are people going to interact with this thing that I have created, and what do I need to keep in mind to plan for these interactions? So they're very specific skills that I was able to develop as a teacher, but they're things now that I'm seeing transfer over into this realm as well. So something I wanted to share a little bit about too was the way that I have started making this transition, because it has been unique. We'll say unique. So I started back at MTSU because I felt like I needed to be a student. Again, I needed to have the space to learn, to hone my craft as writing, also to qualify as internships. Yes, I see you over there repping my graduate institution. So MTSU has been fantastic because they have an open degree program where I can pick exactly what classes I want to take, and I can cater them to specifically what I want to do as a writer. The second thing that I did was I participated in the Themed Entertainment Creative Academy. And so this was an opportunity where I got to learn basically about how to tell stories and how you can tell stories in non-traditional mediums. And so we talked about amusement rides specifically, but we also talked about storyboarding. Storyboarding is something that's really familiar for people who do television or movies, because you're taking pictures and you're looking at how these pictures lay out the story, and then you're also looking at the general considerations that will need to be taken into account for that story. But the same thing happens when you're designing things like rides or interactive spaces or art installations or things like that. From there, I also made a lot of fantastic connections, and one of those connections introduced me to this thing called Haunt Comp, which is a haunted house design competition, which sounds like weird, and it was weird because I am not a haunted house person. I have been to one haunted house in my entire life, but the purpose of the competition was to give students the opportunity to design and not build physically, but virtually through things like Google SketchUp or through other online programs to model out a haunted house. And so my role in this project was the show writer. So what I did was I wrote the story for our haunted house. And we did end up winning 3rd place in that competition, which was pretty cool. I got to go to Long Beach and present it to people within the industry. But that was an incredible opportunity because it was the first time I had somebody from the entertainment industry telling me and walking me through, these are the different things that you really have to consider when writing these very specific documents. And then one of the most recent things that I got to do, and part of the reason that I'm here today, is because I did a internship at the Discovery Center here in Murfreesboro. If you guys have lived here for a while, you might have gone here as kids. It's a small museum that has a lot of interactive exhibits and displays. And while I was there, I worked as a exhibits intern, and one of the things that I focused on was coming up with different stories for different experiences within the museum. This is my favorite one that I actually came up with. There's this big open area that they needed to try to figure out how to revamp and refurbish a little bit. And so using the space and some of the things that were already available to the museum, I came up with the story of a farm-to-table market area. So you can see in the middle there are like farming manipulatives that the concept would be the kids could harvest or plant and then either take to the kitchen where they could cook with them, or they could take them over here to like a little farmer's market area we have with a conveyor belt and a produce stand that they could stock. So those are some of the things that are currently in the museum right now. And so what I was trying to do was think of how can we take what we have and change the narrative around this area and around these pieces in order to make something new for people to experience and to interact with. And I did that with a lot of other exhibits in there as well. I have more information about it on my website if that's something that people are interested in seeing, because I'm seeing some of you react to like knowing the museum and having been there yourselves. So if you want to see some of the things that I came up with, they are on my website. But that was a super amazing experience. I learned so much from the experience, and then I actually got hired after my internship ended. So now I get to continue doing this work. I get to study our exhibits and how our guests interact with them, and then provide recommendations for how to change them, update them, make them more interactive, make them more story-driven. And all I can say is we have some really cool stuff coming in the future. And then because of the work that I've done academically, I also had the opportunity to present at the Themed Entertainment and Attractions Academic Symposium just a couple weeks ago in Orlando. And I got to talk about how I've been studying how different narrative elements can be physically built into architecture. So I know that's a lot, but basically what I do with the museum, my job at the museum, is I look at what things can we physically build into this exhibit that create some sort of story that the people who are coming in, they can either learn about, they can experience, or what elements can we include that encourage the guests to create their own story as they're interacting with these things. And so because I'm a graduate student, I do research. And so part of my research involved looking at this specifically, really studying the different types of narrative structures, naming them, and I wrote a paper about it, and I got invited to share it. So that was really cool. I got to meet some really awesome people. I got to meet some people who work at Disney and get their feedback on it. I also got to meet people from, I don't know if y'all have heard of Meow Wolf. It's like a new up-and-coming art installation collective. It's super weird, but it is very cool, and I have found that it's very, very popular with high school students. So if you guys are looking for something to go down a rabbit hole, Meow Wolf, like the cat, the sound a cat makes, and wolf, the thing that lives in the woods. They do some really cool stuff with art installations, with narrative, with writing, with film, with video production, with acting, immersive theater. They have their hands in pretty much everything. And so if you are looking at maybe pursuing a career in themed entertainment or just want to do something fun or unique in any of those realms, I highly recommend looking into them because they do have internship programs and other opportunities to get involved with what they're doing. Which kind of leads into the next thing that I wanted to cover really quick, because I've had to figure a lot of the stuff out that I'm doing now on my own. and it hasn't always been easy. In fact, a lot of times it's been very difficult because I haven't known what I am doing. And there are a lot of opportunities that I wish that I would have taken advantage of or had just even known about when I was looking at pursuing my undergraduate degree that would have helped prepare me for this field so much better. So a lot of people who work in themed entertainment, who work in planning for these types of experiences, they have theater degrees. A lot of people will have specifically script writing degrees or prop manufacturing degrees or interior architecture, which has to deal with like set building and all that kind of cool stuff. So those are all options under the theater degree. There's script writing for television, for movies. Those kinds of things transfer nicely because like I was showing earlier, there are scripts and treatments that are written for themed entertainment as well. There are a lot of schools that have creative writing degrees now, and even more than that, there are specific entertainment schools that will offer degrees specifically in writing for themed entertainment or for interactive experiences or for immersive experiences. There are a lot of different names that get thrown on it, but there are a lot of schools like University of Central Florida, Savannah College of Arts and Design that offer very specialized programs specifically related to this field. And then with that comes the opportunity for internships. You know, I had the opportunity to do the internship at Discovery Center. I'm actively looking for internships with other companies right now. And internships really are the best way, and this is a blanket statement, just no matter what field you're looking at going into, internships are the best way to learn what you're going to need to know for your future career. It doesn't matter what career you go in. If you are able to get an internship in that field, you are going to be so much better prepared for what you want to do in that field later because you're going to have active hands-on experience and you're going to know the kinds of problems that will come up. You'll know how to react to those problems in real time. I cannot overstate how amazing internship opportunities are, and you can start applying for them at the high school level. So if you know what you want to do, if you're passionate about something, or if you just want to maybe even test something out and see if it's going to be something that you want to pursue for a career, see if you can get an internship in it because you will learn so much more getting that practical hands-on experience than you could learn in a classroom. And then the last thing is just making a portfolio. A portfolio is just a collection of your work. So I have an online portfolio, a website. A lot of people will want you to have some sort of online portfolio when you are looking to apply for jobs. That's not necessarily something that y'all would need to worry about at this level, but it's something to keep in mind now as you're working on things. If you create something that you think is great or fantastic or is just a true reflection of you and your abilities or what you love to do and what you're passionate about, keep it. Don't get rid of it. And hold on to that so one day when you are looking at internships or job opportunities, you can put that in your portfolio because they'll definitely be looking at how many things that you've already done in addition to the quality of work that you have. So if anybody is interested in anything that I've kind of talked about today in the realm of themed entertainment, I did want to throw out my two favorite resources for students. The TEA is the Themed Entertainment Association. They have what is called the Project Development Guidelines. It is online, it is free, it is a PDF that you can download, and it walks you through every single step of creating X, of creating a theme park ride, of creating a museum exhibit, of creating an escape game. It walks you through every single part of that process and talks about what is involved at each level. And so from that, you can really learn about what skills are needed and what roles are available at those different levels. So that's something I highly recommend if you're interested in a field like this. And then if you're interested in writing, writing in any way, shape, or form in the way that you want to tell stories, I cannot over-recommend this new book that just came out. It's only a couple months old, Immersive Storytelling for Real and Imagined Worlds. It's by Margaret Carrison. She used to be a Disney Imagineer. She has like 20 plus years of experience. And this is like the guide, like the student guide for this is how you write for an experience. It is the exact thing that I was looking for when I originally started learning about this field. And it's so helpful. It's so helpful. So if you're interested in this at all, whether it's for video games or just a book that you want to write or a short story, I cannot over-recommend this resource. So just 2 things that I'd like to leave y'all with. So something that I was recently told by a mentor is that when you're looking for jobs in this field, it can be very easy to feel defeated because it can be very difficult to break in. But something to keep in mind is that people in the industry are looking for potential, not perfection. I know that I can be really hard on myself sometimes because I want everything that I do to be perfect before I put it in my portfolio, and I feel like y'all being the type of students you are and being here today, you might put that pressure on yourself as well sometimes. And I just want to encourage you that when you are going into these kinds of jobs, when you're going into these types of fields, the most important thing is for you to be teachable. You don't have to go in having every single thing perfect. You don't have to know every single thing about what you want to do, but you do have to be willing to make mistakes and grow from those mistakes along the way. And then the last thing I'd like to leave you with is to not limit yourself to your perceived opportunities. This is something that I wish somebody would have told me when I was a high schooler, because I had very limited perceived opportunities for what I wanted to be as a writer. And I didn't have a mentor in my life who built into me or who showed me the other options or possibilities that were out there for careers in writing. And so I've gone on this decade-long journey of trying to figure out what I want to do with my life. And I got there. We're there. I know what I want to do. We're good. But it could have happened for me a lot sooner if I would have been open to learning more about the job opportunities and the roles that are out there for people who are interested in writing. So if there's something that you're passionate about, if there's something that you've loved since you were a kid, if there's something that you think you're uniquely gifted at or good at, or you just love, it's just something that brings you joy, I guarantee you that you can turn it into a career somehow. And it might take a little creativity, it might take some ingenuity on your part, but it's not worth discounting those things and moving on and going for a regular job just because you think that's going to be an easier path. So if there's something that you love, if there's something that you want to pursue, do it. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and open the floor for questions. That's my email address. If anybody has anything that they would like to ask over email or ever want any resources or just to talk about life, you know, there's my email address. And there's also my address for my online portfolio if anybody ever needs examples of anything for whatever. Okay, purple shirt.
Okay, so when you first walked in, you were talking about COVID and how it kind of helped you decide what you wanted to do. Do you think if that didn't happen, you would have found another way to figure it out, or do you think you'd still be doing something else?
I think that I probably would have eventually figured it out. I think COVID exasperated a lot of situations and a lot of things that were already happening behind the scenes and just brought them more to the forefront. And so I think that eventually I would have gotten there, but having that time off to really reevaluate, because I mean, we were all sitting in our homes for what, 3 months straight with like nothing to do. You do a lot of thinking at that time. And so I think I probably would have eventually gotten there, but I definitely think that having that time to step back and relax and think about things and research things gave me the opportunity to find this as a career field. Yes.
So I wanted to ask, what would you say the value, like the ultimate value of an internship is? Like, what is the most important thing you get from any internship?
It's without a doubt the hands-on experience. So I mentioned earlier when I was teaching as an ESL teacher, when I got into the classroom, there were a ton of things that I didn't know that I needed to do. And there are several reasons for that I won't get into right now, but the easiest way to put it is I did not have the best student teaching experience, and there were a lot of things that I should have been taught through my student teaching that I wasn't. And so student teaching is really supposed to be like an internship. And so if I would have had stronger leadership in that experience, I might have been more prepared for those things. But the thing about an internship is you're essentially taking on that role. You are working in that role, you have those responsibilities, and it's not theoretical anymore. It's not something that you're reading about or being told about. You have to do it, and the only option is to do it. And so you're either going to figure it out and be successful right away, or you're gonna make mistakes, which actually might be better because I think you learn more from mistakes. and then you have that experience, so when you go into the career full time, then you've already encountered some of the challenges that you will be encountering in your everyday life, in your everyday career. So I don't know if there's a technical word for that, but it's just this concept of having the experience of the actual job and getting basically to do a trial run of it, so you can be more prepared for it when you actually get into that experience full time later. Purple shirt again.
In your opinion, what is the most important part when creating a story? Like, if you were going to read a book or something, and you saw this in the story, you were immediately like, oh, this is a good book. But if you didn't see it in another one, you'd be like, oh, this is not as good as a book, or something like that.
Right now, I would say, because I feel like this is subject to change, but right now I would say the ability to see a universal human experience within a story. Because if I can connect somehow to what I'm reading, I'm automatically going to be more invested in it. And there are things that everybody experiences that are universal. We all experience, the same emotions at some point. We all experience the pandemic together, so that's another thing. But there are very basic things that, it doesn't matter if you're here or across the world, that you've had some sort of experience with, that you can put an emotional investment in. And so I think identifying that and making that the heart of the story is what is really going to set it apart from others, and also make it more, not accessible, but make it more appealing to a broader audience, because you're going to get a better buy-in from other people who have also had or can identify with that experience. Yes?
So for like the Discovery Center, you're obviously, that's like designed for a very specific age group, like very young children usually. Would you say that, like, obviously like the teaching background probably would be easier for you to design things for like younger children, but how do you think you would go about like designing something for like a different age group?
Yes. Full creative liberties. I think too, so it varies depending on what you're designing. So we'll take, for example, the Discovery Center. So the Discovery Center is a children's museum. It is an interactive children's museum where you go and you interact with things. It's very science and education based, and it is exactly what you said. Because I have my background in education, I'm able to more readily, I think, identify skills or themes that need to be built into these exhibits in order to help kids learn and develop from them. When you're looking at doing something for, let's say, high school students or adults, you're obviously going to want to come at it from a different perspective. And I think that there is a lot of value in drawing on your own experiences, because like I'm currently an adult. I was once a high school student, so I can think back to those times and say, well, where was I at, first of all, developmentally at this time? Because I think a lot of what we perceive and a lot of how we interact with things, especially in these immersive and interactive spaces, have to do with where we're at developmentally. And I say that from like a brain chemistry aspect. My husband is a psychometrist. My husband's a psychometrist. He knows a lot of stuff about the brains, so this is a conversation we have pretty frequently in our household. But I do think with that, there, again, pulling back to that idea of the universal experience, when you're designing something for a different age, there's the ability to pull on your own personal experience and your own knowledge of the developmental skills or developmental level that people would be at that age, and so what would be appropriate or desirable from an experience like that. But then the other thing too, and I think part of the reason that I have been able to see success in this area is just research. I don't want to say everything, but a lot of things that you need to know about different people groups that you're designing for are out there online in a journal somewhere. And so if you have the ability to research and learn about those kinds of things and then internalize them and apply them, then you're going to be able to see success in those areas. Does that answer your question? I kind of feel like I went all over the place for a second. Okay, cool. Yes?
So when experiencing writer's block, would you say that it's better to wait for inspiration to come naturally, or to try and push through that experience and like create anyways?
That's a great question. I think that this is a very also subjective question. because I have a professor this semester who doesn't believe in writer's block. He doesn't think that it exists. And I'm like, agree to disagree. But I think for me personally, I have found writing through writer's block is better than waiting for inspiration to strike. And part of that is because I am an editor. So I self-edit myself relentlessly. If I'm able to get something on the page, then I can eventually go back and edit it and tweak it and change it enough for it to be good. It doesn't have to be good when I put it down. As long as I put something down, I'm usually able to find that I can go back and change it enough to make it something that I'm proud of or happy with. So my advice for writer's block is to not push it through it in the way of like, just sit there and wait for something to happen. My idea of pushing through it is putting something down on paper, even if you hate it, leave it, come back to it, and then see if you're able to rework it in a way that you can create it, that you can change it to be something that you are proud that you have created. The writer's block is frustrating. I will say that. Yes.
So you said you did like TESOL, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you go about teaching like completely foreign concepts to people who wouldn't necessarily understand in a way like that you would immediately be like, oh, that's so obvious, but to them it's kind of not as, it doesn't come as easy.
That's a great question. That's such a great question. I think one of the big things is you have to rethink, you have to reframe your thinking. And I think that this is something that everybody could maybe do a little bit better, because I feel like this comes down to almost a level of empathy, because it can be so easy to look at someone, and not even just a child, but it can be so easy to look at someone and be like, you don't know this? How do you not know this? This is so obvious. But when you go back and think about it, we've all had to be taught every single thing that we know. And so there's an element of that, of like not being judgmental, and then also not assuming that they know anything. I would always start from the space of, this is the first time that they are hearing about this concept. And starting at that place made it easier for me to be like, okay, if this is the very first time that they're hearing about it, what are all the little tiny things that I need to have prepared and that I need to teach and I need to allow them to interact with, so they can build a knowledge of this from the very foundation up. And then you have the added challenge of some of those kids don't speak any English whatsoever, which is another challenge in itself. And the good thing about working with younger kids is their brain plasticity is incredible, basically meaning they pick up on things a lot faster because their brain is a lot, it's not a muscle, but that's a good analogy for it, is it's like a very stretchy muscle. Like if I were to try to do the splits right now, it wouldn't be good. But if a 5-year-old came up here and tried to do the splits right now, they could probably do it pretty well. So the same thing kind of happens with your brain, and when you're younger, you're able to absorb information and retain it a lot easier than you are when you're an adult. And what that means basically is younger kids can acquire a second language quicker and with an easier time and fluency than an adult. So if I was working in a high school classroom, it would have been a lot more challenging, because at that point, it would have been more difficult for them to acquire language. But especially in the elementary setting, because elementary schoolers too are also so social, they're able to acquire language a lot quicker. One of the things that my team though would make sure that we do is provide a lot of tactile experiences. So like one of the pictures that I had was when we made pancakes one time. We were explaining the concepts of solids, liquids, and gases. And so we brought in pancakes because a pancake batter is more of a liquid. And then when you put it on the iron, it turns into a solid, but you also see the gas because the bubbles pop up. So providing very concrete examples like that the kids could actually physically interact with and see in front of them to help make sense out of that information also really helped with that process. It's a lot. There's a lot of like little stuff to think about with it, but it really does become second nature when you're in it and you're living in that experience.
I think we have time. Oh, that's it. I'm sorry.
If you have other questions, shoot me an email. I love getting emails and I will respond to them quickly because finals are almost done. Thank you.